everyone. Welcome to the session. This is the third lecture in the deep learning series, and it's going to be all about convolutional neural networks. So we've already covered neural networks, which we saw were basically just general function approximators for mapping any for learning a relationship to map any input to any output, and we previously trained those using some supervised data sets where we had labels and features for each example. And what we saw was that they managed to classify MNIST, I think was the example, to a pretty high degree of accuracy. But today we're going to talk about the firstly the limitations of neural networks, and then basically how convolutional neural networks can be a specific architecture for overcoming some of those challenges. So as usual, first thing you want to do is just clone this repo. So if you just copy that, and then you go to this link, which will be here, and then if you go into this file, CNNs, the notebook for that, and then we can get started. You want to download this notebook, and then you can run it in Colab if you don't want to download it as well. So that's pretty easy to do. All you have to do is go to Colab, GitHub, search AI-core. Then you'll be able to see all of our repos. You want to go to the convolutional neural networks one, and then you want to find this convolutional neural networks notebook. Just click that, and it will open just like I have here. So, any troubles with that or issues, just let me know. Otherwise, we'll get straight into it. So, as I was alluding to, the way neural networks process images, like MNIST, like the handwritten digit dataset, which we did last time, there's some drawbacks to the way that was happening. So let's talk about that. The fully connected neural network we looked at in the previous lesson took in a vector as an input. And the way that we passed an image into this model was that we flattened it by stacking all of the rows end to end, so they became not a 2D matrix, but a one-dimensional vector. And so, and then once we had that vector, we could pass that into our neural network as an input, because we know neural networks take vectors as inputs. So for some problems, the order of the features in each example doesn't matter. So you could have a vector representing a person, and it could have their age, height, hair length as the three different features in that three-dimensional vector. But this isn't the case for images. So if you randomly reorder all the pixels in an image, it's most likely going to be totally unrecognizable. And this is because most of the useful information in images comes not from the values of the features, like the actual pixel intensities, the numbers which you see in that place in the image, but most of the information comes from their relative positions to each other. And this is why, if you randomly reorder the pixels in an image, it's going to be totally unrecognizable, because most of the information is in the relative positions. So the same is true for processing any other spatially structured data, such as videos or sound waves, medical scans, or 3D models. All of these kind of types of data, the meaning and the real information inside those features of each example is based upon how the relative positions of the pixels are laid out, or whatever, voxels. Voxels is what you call a pixel in 3D, which would be the case for a 3D model. So basically, we can say the spatial relationships from the different pixels is the information that's crucial to understanding of the image. And when we flatten the image, we lose that information because we are reordering things, right? Like if there's two pixels which are directly above and below each other, and we take each of the rows and stack them end to end, then those pixels which were originally next to each other but on different rows are now just in different positions but disparately across the entire vector. So this means by doing this kind of initial transformation that we do with the MNIST, stacking the rows end to end to make a vector, we lose a lot of the information. So another thing which neural networks, another limitation of neural networks when processing spatially structured data is to do with, or well, kind of an advantage can be to weight share across space. What does this mean? So regardless of where I see something in my field of view, it can be processed the same way. If I'm looking for something specific, it doesn't matter whether I see it on the left or the right, I need to be able to identify it in the same way. Neural networks have individual weights for each input feature because they expect each feature to represent a totally different thing, like age, height, hair length. And in other domains, like computer vision, different features, that are the pixels in the computer vision case, can represent the same thing, just in different locations. So whatever that is, just if it's in the different location, you need to be able to process it in the same way. So instead of learning to look for the same features of an image with different weights for each position that the feature might be in, we should try to figure out a way that we can share those same weights over all the positions of the input. So I want to use the same parameters to identify different features of the image wherever that feature appears in the image, or generally in any spatially structured data. And that's going to save us both time and memory in computing and storing these duplicate weights, right? Because it means we're not going to have to process we're not going to have to process basically the different features with all different weights and store different weights which are to do with different features. So what? Using our prior understanding of how image data should be processed spatially, we'd like to find some kind of model that can retain the spatial structure of an input and look for the same features over the whole of the space. And this is basically what convolutional neural networks are for. So firstly, let's just look at images as data. And at this point, yeah, let me just check if there's any questions. Feel free to throw anything in here that you need help with. It's going to be a quick session if you don't ask too many questions. Okay, so images as data. Images obviously are not vectors. They don't just have a length, they also have a width. So they have a height and a width rather than just a length. So they need to be a matrix. You can see the obvious two dimensions in an image are the height and the width. However, any non-black or non-grayscale, I should say, any grayscale image is going to be only made up of pixels which vary from dark to light, that is from black to white. But any non-grayscale image is going to be made up of combinations of different colors. So depending on what the format of the image is, then the actual how the pixels are combined to give color varies. But any non-black color can be made by combining three primary colors. We know that, right? So as such, as well as height and width, color images have another axis called the channels, which specify the intensity, different contribution of each of these primary colors. So red, green, and blue are the standard primary colors. So most images that we work with will have a red channel, a green channel, and a blue channel, illustrated as such, right? So the image, which is obviously two-dimensional when we look at it, the actual data is has three axes. It has a height, a width, and a depth in the number of channels. So, and what is this depth? Well, this is basically the we have a matrix of the redness in the image, which kind of looks like this. We have a matrix of the greenness of all the different pixels in the image, and a matrix of the blueness of all of the different pixels in the image. And combining these three, stacking them together, and looking at all of these colors in combination gives you the color image, which you see like this. And so when we are going to be processing images, this is the kind of this is the visualization of what the data looks like. It has these three dimensions, these three axes. So, you know, the PNG image type for example, can also have a transparent background, in which case there might even be a fourth channel, which represents the opacity at each pixel location. Any questions about that? Getting set up? No? Cool. Basic stuff. Good. All right. So, question is, how was computer vision done before deep learning? Well, in the past, people would try to draw patterns that they thought would appear in the images and be useful for the problem they were trying to solve. It was a painstakingly long process and was obviously susceptible to a lot of bias by these people who had to manually design the features. So they would draw things like this, right? They would say, okay, well, I think the feature which I want to look for in this image to solve my downstream problem is it might the feature might be like a vertical line, a dark vertical line. And so they'll basically say, okay, I want to look for this kind of feature, or maybe I want to look for this kind of face. People would draw these themselves, and they're somehow going to use these different filters, as we call them, and we'll see why in a second, to search for these features across the image. So, so basically these supposedly useful patterns are known as filters or kernels, and each filter looks for a particular pattern. And what we're going to do is, I'll probably explain here. So filters look for patterns they represent by seeing how similar the pixels at each location match the values which these filters contain. So a mathematically convenient way to do this is to take a dot product, that is a element-wise multiplication and then sum, between all of the filter values and the input values which it covers. So we're basically going to take these different filters, place them on top of the image in, say, like the top left corner, and see, is this filter matched highly here? Like, what's the final number which I get by doing element-wise multiplication of these filter values with the pixels which they cover, and then summing all of those up. And I hope that if that number is high, that is like there's high values here and there was high values on the image below, then all of those are going to be multiplied a high number by high number and sum out to a larger number. And this should indicate that this filter was highly matched here. And then basically we're going to do that, like I said, in the very start of the image in the top left corner. And then we're going to move this filter to a different location, maybe like 1 pixel to the right. Do the same thing again. How well was the filter matched here? Move it to the right again. How well was it matched here? Until we get all the way to the other end, and then move down to the next row and continue to pass this filter over every location in the image. So and like I said, every time we do that filter matching, it produces a single value which should be large when the filter is correctly matched. And it's standard for filters to always convolve through the full depth of the input. So like I showed previously, these images which we're going to process can also have depth, and that means that these filters can also have depth as well. So it might not just be this 2D grid, but it might be 3 of them stacked on top of each other, and each of them could be different, and each of them are going to be basically saying, what's the pattern of what's the pattern which I'm looking for in the red channel, the green channel, and the blue channel. We're going to do an element-wise multiplication as well. Same thing, just dot product, and then basically high number indicates that they're well matched. So that's what I'm saying there. Filters convolve through the full depth of the input. So if we have an input with 3 channels, our kernel will also have a depth of 3, where each channel the filter is looking is what it looks for from the corresponding color channel. So if our input has 54 channels, then so will our filter. You're probably asking at this point, well, the image isn't going to have 54 channels, so why have you even said that? But we'll see. These filters don't just pass over the initial image. We're going to get to that in a bit. So we can totally choose the width and the height of the kernels. That's a height parameter, which is up to us, and it's pretty standard for them to have equal width and height. But that's again just the ratio of those could be a different height parameter. So now let's actually talk about convolution. In machine learning, I'm going to describe what convolution is, but in non-machine learning is actually something different. But in machine learning, convolution is the process of moving a filter across every possible location of an input and then computing a value for how well that filter is matched at each of those locations. So the pattern matching over the spatially structured input produces a similar spatially structured output. So we're going to pass in some image which has, like I said, 3 axes. It has a height, a width, and a depth, and I'm going to get out some, and my output of this convolution is also going to have a spatial structure. And so basically, I'm gonna in the case of image, I'm gonna basically do 2D convolution. So I'm gonna take this filter, place it in the top left, move it all the way in the row direction, and then move down to the next row. So I'm basically doing convolution across the rows and the columns. And at every time I'm doing that convolution, this filter is, it has the same depth as the input, and so it's convolving all the way through. So at every spatial location, which is the height and the width, I'm getting a single number, which is the combination of the matched filters of the matched filter at each different channel. So every time I do a convolution every time I do a convolution in a single location, I get a single number. When I move it in one step to the right, well, then I get another single number, and then all the way to the end. So I get a lot of different single numbers, and then I get the next row. I also get the single numbers. So my output is also going to be like a 2D. It's gonna be like another image, but it's not quite going to be an image, right? Because the image is the original thing. This is going to be like a processed version of the image. It's going to be a 2D representation of how well is this filter matched at any location, at every location across the image. And what we call this is an activation map, or a feature map, because it represents the activations in the next layer that should represent some more complex features than the feature maps of the input, or the original input, right? So we're going to basically look for that feature across all of the image, and then hopefully we can get some meaningful output from that, which tells us how present is this more complicated thing, i.e. what I'm looking for in the feature at that location. How present is a face in this location, or how present is it at the next location, and so on. So let's just look at this animation to make that a bit clearer. But basically what I've got here is a kernel which has only +1s and -1s as its weights. So this kernel has its own parameters. Those are the weights, the plus and minus ones. They could be any number, but in this case I've just given them plus or minus 1 values. They could be any continuous number above or below -1 and 1. And so what I'm then doing is I'm taking this kernel, placing it, like I said, in the first location of the image. That's by convention the top left, and then I'm moving it, and then basically I'm saying how well does it match this location, right? And the way I do that is I do 0 times 1 by 1 times 1, by 1 times -1 plus 1 times -1, all the way through every location across this filter, and I get a single number. So the element-wise product and sum of the filter in this location is -1. Next location, 2. Next location, -1. And so I've already told you that the single numbers which are output in each location should be the representation of how well is the filter matched in this location. So where is this filter going to be matched, right? Well, let's have a look at the output and that'll tell us. The highest number is here. With this 5, which is here. So where did that 5 come from, right? It came when we put the filter in what location? This location. So in this location, you can see in the image, this input matrix, the pattern in the image matches exactly the filter. It has this white cross exactly here, right? So this means that everywhere the filter says there should be a high number here, there is a high number there in the image. And this means that the filter is well matched. So doing the element-wise multiplication and sum, it gives us the highest possible value at this location. In the next location, one across, you can see it's the anti-pattern of this kernel. So it's dark where the kernel says it should be light, and it's light where it says it should be dark. and hence is actually given a really negative number, the most negative number in that location. So that one more time. So high value here, low value here. That means the filter is very matched here. This feature is present here, but not very much at all here. Cool. So let's just take like a few minute break. I'm gonna go into my group, and you guys should go into your groups as well, and then we'll come back in a second once we've just made sure that this convolution operation for a single filter in a single grayscale image in this case is really clear, and then we'll move on to more parameters and actually implementing it later. Cool. Okay, back with the audio right now. So let me just say that again. So we know that convolution is where we get these our filters, which are looking for particular patterns in the image or in our spatially structured data. That pattern is defined by the weights within each filter. And what we're going to do is we're going to place this filter on the image, and we're going to move it across the image to see how well it's matched. And how well it's matched we compute by doing a dot product. So as well as the obvious parameters of the filter, the height and the width, the convolution operation, which is moving this filter across all the locations which it fits, also has a few possible parameters, including the stride, which is the number of pixels which we shift our kernel along by to compute the next value. So in this case, we're moving the filter by one step every time we compute a value for the activation map, and that is stride 1. So yeah, increased stride means that less values are computed for the output activation map, which means that we have to do less computation because obviously there's less multiplication, and we store less output information for the same reason. And this decreases computing time and cost and reduces memory requirements by reducing the output resolution. But it does reduce the output resolution. So depending on what your problem is, what the problem you're trying to solve, and what the data set you have for it is, depends on how much you should use this stride. But it is something you can play around with. It's another high parameter to explore. Padding is another thing we can do. We can pad the input with a border of extra pixels around the edge. I think we have a little drawing of this here. Yeah, so this is like what padding might look like. I have my image and I can pad it with zeros all the way around the edge. So why might we want to do this? So the first thing, and probably the most important thing, is that you can see the output which we produce for this convolution of a 3x3 filter over a 5x5 input image. The output is 3x3. So like I said before, we get an output which is also spatially structured, but what you can notice is that by convolution it's reduced in size. Now, we know that neural networks apply successive transformations like these, and that by performing the successive transformations, we hope to build up like a successive hierarchy, an increasingly complex hierarchy of features which are detected in the image, which means that we'd like to have deeper models. Deeper models mean that we can, in the first layer, build features from the inputs, in the second layer, build features from the first features, in the third layer, build features from the features from the input, and build up an increasingly complex and more abstract representation of our input. So we want depth in our model, right? For that reason. But by doing this convolution, we've reduced it in size. So now with this 3x3 image, if we want to say in the next layer, that is like taking this output as the input to another convolution, if we want to also do a convolution of a 3x3 kernel, well, what's going to happen then? Well, there's only one place, there's only one location that you can fit a 3x3 kernel on this output. And that means that the output of a next layer, which is of a 3x3 convolution over this input, it'll just be a single value. It's going to produce a scalar. And okay, from there, well, if we've got a scalar, how much more convolution can we do? None. Like, we can't even fit a 3x3 kernel onto that grid. Another way you can think about it is like how many, if you had a kernel which was 5x5, you could only put it in one location here, and that would produce you a single number. And so basically the reduction in the size of the input, which is necessary by having these unpadded convolutions, limits the depth of your model, which limits the capacity, the representational capacity of the functions which your model can represent. So deeper models can represent more complex relationships between input-output, which is exactly what we want to do. So without padding, the image size is always going to decrease. But if we were to add an extra layer around here, well, then that would increase this this image to 7x7. And then if we run a 3x3 kernel over that, the output would be 5x5. And this means that by adding padding, we don't have to reduce the size of our of the input to each successive layer, and that means we can get more depth. So I think that's what I've explained here. Yep, and yeah, convolution with a 1x1 filter is equivalent to multiplication, and that doesn't really help us to extract any more meaningful information from a representation of an input. So another reason why we might want to pad is to get equal input from each pixel. So if we look up here, now this pixel is only included, it only contributes to one pixel location in the output activation map. Similarly with all of the corner pixels, they only appear in one of these output activation map features. And the ones around the edge, they only appear in a few, and the one in the middle, it appears in every single one of them. So this one is being, you know, kind of like overly prioritized compared to the others. So if we were to add, again, another padding of zeros, a single layer of zeros around this edge, then basically this pixel would be included in what, like 1, 2, 3, 4 different it would contribute to 4 of the pixels in the output activation map. And so this can kind of say, you know, because there shouldn't be a bias. You shouldn't be biased to saying like, well, the more central or further from the edges pixels are more relevant, because it's not necessarily true. What you're looking for might be right on the edge. So that's another reason why you might want to add padding. What else do we have? Yeah, cool. So we can have different padding modes as well. So what I've drawn here is what you call zero padding. So this is a single layer of zero padding. So there's 2 things there. One is that it doesn't have to be single layer. You could have multiple layers of zeros around the edge. Obviously you don't want to do that too much. And you could also, the other thing is that you could pad with not zeros, but something else. So you could, for example, extend whatever pixel is at the edge all the way out for however many layers of padding you want. Or you could reflect what the inside pixels look like to the outside. So there's just a few different ways of doing it. Again, those are hyperparameters, which you can play around with. Don't know too much about using them, but just so you know. Cool, yeah, so this is basically the information you need to know about these 2 things, stride and padding. Useful equation, maybe, here, tells you the output shape from the size of the input, the kernel size, and the stride. And then this size of the input includes padding in this case. So what do we have? Let's just have a look at that equation, right? We had a 5x5 input, so n was 5, and kernel was 3x3, and so that's k is 3, and the stride was 1, right? So we had 5 minus 3 divided by 1, so that was 2 plus 1, and this should be the output shape. 2 plus 1 is 3, well, that's why our output is 3x3. And you can apply this in each different dimension as well if it were non-square. Cool. Any questions about that? Nice. Are these all extra high parameters? Like, yes, stride, padding, padding mode, etc. They're all hyperparameters. Cool. Yeah, just throw any more questions you got there. And if we don't have a square matrix, well then you can do exactly the same kind of thing. You can still do convolution. It's just that your output will also not be square. You don't have to have a square input, or you don't have to have a square filter. Like either of them can be an arbitrary shape. There's no restriction that the width and height should be equal. However, one thing to note is that, and this kind of ties into your question there, but I just thought about it in terms of stride, which is that if you have a stride of, let's say we had like a stride of 3, right? Is that going to make sense for this 7x7 image? Well, it's going to move 1, 2, 3. So the next pixel, the next location of this filter is going to be here, and that means, well, then when we want to move another 3 steps, we're not going to be able to, because we don't butt up against the edge here. So it's just going to go to the next line. which is, it doesn't really make quite a lot of sense. So what we should try and do is have like a stride which matches up with the size of the image, so that all of the image is processed at least. And to that point, yeah, probably have a combination of stride and kernel size, such that you're not losing space, such that you're not processing any space between them. You probably don't want to leave out information which might be there. Let me know if that doesn't answer your question. But yeah, we can have arbitrarily sized inputs and filters. How can we decide which type of padding to use? Any tips what we should be doing basing our choice on? I don't really have any tips. No, I don't think it's that deep. You know, there's probably more important things to worry about, like your model architecture, like the actual number of layers and such. But I'm sure it's out there. If anybody else knows that, please chime in. I don't have too much experience playing around with different types of padding. But yeah, please find out for yourself and let us know. How does a filter move vertically if stride is 2? Does it move 2 spaces vertically too? Absolutely correct, yeah. Exactly. Cool. Yeah, let us know what you find out. Cool. All right, again, we'll just have a 5-minute break, and I'm going to force you all into the groups, so I can do that now. Okay, we're back, and at least some of you get what's going on, so that's good. So, what's happening now? Yeah, so basically what we talked about so far is, or what we just talked about is the convolution operation. So what does it mean to actually do a convolution? Now what we're going to talk about is the convolutional layer. So now I'm going to basically compare how we had layers in neural networks and how we have them in convolutional neural networks. So firstly, what does this say? In practice, we want to look for more than just one feature in any input. When we use a neural network, each layer had multiple outputs, and these were corresponding to the different features which we'd learned to identify within that layer and how well they're expressed in that layer. And similarly, instead of just convolving a single filter over the input to produce a single activation map, we're going to convolve many filters over the input to produce many activation maps. And so, so basically the output nodes of a layer that we would have in a regular neural network, they are analogous to the different activation maps which we will produce in a convolutional neural network. So, so what this produces is not just a single value for each feature that we're looking for, that is for each different weight combination, but it produces an activation map for each of these filters. So the output has an extra dimension in addition to the spatial ones, which corresponds to the number of activation maps we produced, and that is the number of kernels which we convolved over the image. So we're not just going to use this one filter, we're going to use many different filters. And each of the different filters are going to look for different things. And that means they're going to produce different activation maps. So what is the output of a convolutional layer here? It's actually a stack of all of these activation maps. So if we use 10 different filters, we're going to produce 10 different outputs. And then the dimension of the actual output of this layer will be 3 by 3 by 10. So you can kind of see this in this diagram here. So if we consider what we would do firstly in a linear layer, which would be what Torch calls the layers in a neural network. So what we'd have is some input with 3 axes. We'd flatten out those axes so that they're all just, it's just an n vector. And then basically we would have different sets of weights with n different weights for each, n different weights. And each of those weights corresponds to how much should a different feature, one of these n different features in each vector, contribute to a particular output. So this pink set of n different vectors, n different weights, tells you how much does each of the n different features contribute to this particular output, right? So this would be like the output layer. This would be the output of our linear layer. So it would be like, it would take an n vector to a k vector. And where does this k come from, right? Well, this is the different combinations of weights which we are applying, right? So that's basically how a regular layer works in a neural network. And feel free to check the last notebook if that's not totally clear. But what we're here for is convolutional layers. So how is this process analogy? What's the layer input? What's the layer weights? And what's the layer output? Well, we have the image, which is still spatially structured. We're not going to flatten it like we did here. So we're just going to take this, and now we have these different weights, the different filters. And what we're going to do, well, firstly, what size are they? Well, they are filter size by filter size. By default, we've got them equal width and height, but that's not necessary. And then they also have their own depth. And what is that depth? Well, the depth C is the depth of the input. In this case, it's the depth of the image. But in general, we're going to say it's the depth of the input, because the input to a convolutional layer might not always be the image. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this filter and we're going to drop it on the top left corner of the image. So there's like 3 of them drawn here in the first 3 positions. Yeah, so we're going to compute how well is this filter matched by the pixels in this image in the top left location. And that produces this this value here, which I've labeled with a label 1. So putting all of these values, these k by k by c values, into this k by k by c region of the image produces a single value when we do a dot product. And then we're going to move that filter to the next location, produce this one, which I've labeled with a 2, and then produce this one, which I've labeled with a 3, until we get a whole pink activation map, which has as many different pixels as there are different locations which you can place this filter across the image by its width and height. But it has a depth of 1, right? Because every time we drop it in some location, we're summing up all these values, regardless of where they are in depth. So we're summing them all up to reduce a single number. So each of these activation maps has a depth of 1. And then we're going to do exactly the same thing with the different filters, yeah? And we're going to produce many different activation maps. So just comparing this convolutional layer to the regular linear layer, well, what's the analogy here, right? So, okay, we had a vector of weights, which took in some inputs and said how much they contribute to a particular output. In a convolutional layer, we have some, again, particular set of weights, which take in some inputs and say how much do these inputs contribute to a particular location in the output activation map. And that's the slight difference. And then instead of just having scalar values for how well this filter is matched, we have activation maps. So these are how well was this filter mapped at each different location across the image, and basically, so yeah, spatial expression of this feature, spatial expression of all the features is what the stack represents. Okay. Now, what do we do with this, right? Well, this is the output of this layer, and we know that if we had a regular neural network, what we do is we take this output as the input to the next. So this is going to be convolved over by the filters in the next layer, right? So we're going to have some filters here, they're going to convolve over this, and they're going to produce another activation map. So, and these filters are going to have a depth of not 3, or not C, but 4, right? Because this has a depth of 4, and we're going to convolve all the way through it with each of our filters. Okay. Any questions right now? Cool. I guess it's the same person. You good? Let me know. Cool. So let's say I had an image. Let's say I had an RGB image of height and width equal to 9, and then I had kernel. Let's have a square kernel with size equal to 3, and then I'm going to have a, what am I going to have? I'm going to have a stride of 3. Is that what I'm thinking? Yeah, cool. And I'm going to have 0 padding. Then tell me, what is the output size? Okay, and let's say I've got with 12 kernels. I would like somebody to give me the size of this convolution operation, right? So these are basically all the different parameters that we could have. So I want you guys to tell me what is the size of that output. I want the size in height by width by depth. And I'm going to draw it as we go. Yes, 0 padding means no padding. So this is what I got, right? I've got a 9x9 image and it's RGB, so it's got some depth like that and so on. And now I'm going to get yeah, is that right? Cool, it is. Good, now I'm going to get my filter. That's the color I want. I'm going to get my filter. And it's going to be 3x3, right? And I'm going to move this across the image. So I want you guys to tell me what's the size of this output. And I want height. So I want height by width by depth as well. So 3x3, yes, that is the correct height and width. What about the depth? So you guys have combined. You've got the answer, but you're both missing something. So you, my friend, are missing the fact that we've got 12 of these filters. So as our friend here has said, the depth will be all of these activation maps stacked together. So not 3, but 12. So the output is going to be 3x3 by 12. And you've done you know exactly what's going on. You've just forgotten to account for the stride. So the stride is 3. So we're not going to step just by one step along. We're going to step by 1, 2, 3 to here. Yeah, so this is going to be the next location. If anybody wants to know the AI core colors, FF822E. Then the next location is going to be here. Again, then we're going to step 3 along and we're going to go here. Okay, and each of these filters is going to convolve all the way through the full depth of the image or the input. And then they're going to produce a single number each, right? So we're going to have number 1, number 2, and then number 3. And this is going to be a 3x3 output like that, right? Cool. Yeah, sorry. I don't know why that's happening. But it might be because of your browser, because it works on most people's browsers. But we'll try and fix that. Anyway, good effort. Nice one. So, that's that. So let's move on. Nice one. Good exercise. So, what do we have now? The question is, what does each filter look for? Like, what is it looking for? Is a question. Like, where did this pattern come from? Well, like I said, maybe I drew it myself. Maybe I said I know exactly how to find cars in images. I'm just going to look for this X and see where that's activated. But if that were true, like even if I did want to do that, then I'd have to spend a long time figuring out what features are correct for me to look for. And the thing is, we don't want to do that. So like I said, engineers used to have to tune filter values manually. But now, just like the weights and the biases and all the parameters in our neural networks, these filters can be learned automatically by backprop and gradient descent. So just like these values, we're going to produce an output, compare it to the label, and then minimize the loss with respect to these values and move them in that direction. What that's going to do is it's going to then give us an idea of a heuristic which tells us the direction which we should move our weights in. These weights are exactly the same. Again, we can just produce an output and then compare that to a label and then try and move these weights in the direction which minimizes that error. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're just going to discuss two more things before we do the code, which is pooling layers. Firstly, so immediately after convolutional layer, it's common to apply some form of pooling. Pooling is a technique that summarizes or downsamples the values in a local region of the input, reducing the number of values in its output, and therefore reducing the number of parameters that need to be learned for succeeding parameterized operation, such as further convolution or linear layer. So, I mean, let's just stop and make sure we're clear what that is firstly, right? So, what pooling would do, maybe I can draw it, but it might not be that good. So, what I can do is, let's say I have a 5x5 image like this. Beautiful. And I want to, sorry, that's 4x4. Well, let's say I want to downsample it, right? I want to do some pooling on this layer. So let's say I'm going to do what's called 2x2 max pooling, right? But firstly, I'm going to say that, like, just for simplicity, all of the values which I draw a 1 in have a 1, and then all the rest have a 0, right? So I'm going to do this. Maybe this is what my image looks like. It's got 1s in these locations. It's got 0s everywhere else. So what's the pool? What's a 2x2 pool of this going to look like, right? So what that means is that I take 2x2 regions, and I'm going to summarize them all together to downsample this image. So let's say I'm going to do max pooling, right? So the question is, what's the max in this region? It's a 1. What's the max in this region? It's also a 1. What's the max in, so that'll be the second area that I pull. Third area I pull is going to be here, and the max number in there is 0, and the max in here is a 1. So this is what the output of my pooling operation looks like. I should really get a mouse. So that's what the output of a 2x2 max pool looks like. So that's not the only type of pooling we can have. We can also have average pooling. So if we make an average pool of this area, well, then it's going to be 1 plus 1 plus 0 plus 0 divided by 4. There's 4 features in there. That's going to be 2 over 4, which is 1 over 2. Oh god. Okay, this must be entertaining. All right, cool. So that's the region there. Similarly, I'm not even going to draw it, but that's what goes there on the right-hand side. So again, we're going to pool our image, but we're going to use average pooling this time, right? So half there, 0 here, and then 1 over 4 here. This is what an average pool would produce us. Okay, so why have we done that, right? Well, it means that in the next layer, because this is the output of this layer, right? So maybe we've done some convolution to produce this, and then we're just going to average pool that, and then that's going to be the input to our next layer. So this reduces the computation, because we don't need to do so many convolutions. So say we're doing like 2x2 convolutions. If we were doing 2x2 convolutions over this, we'd have to do 4. We have to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different convolutions for each filter. In this case, we only have to do 1 if we had a 2x2 filter, right? Because this output, which is the pooled output from the previous layer, is going to be input to our next layer. So we have to do less computation, and also the next layer needs less parameters. So by doing this pooling, we can reduce both the computational cost, which is now just to the time, and also the memory requirements for our model, which might mean that it can fit on a smaller device, both those things mean it can fit on a smaller device and it can be more performant. Cool, right? So questions about that. Just gonna answer these. Cool. Cool. Do the activation maps still have RGB information, or does it become a grayscale image after the convolution operation? Well, each activation map is only one channel deep, so yeah, it basically it's an abstraction. It's a summary of all of the colors combined into some yeah, like it doesn't represent a color anymore, but it'll be represented in one channel, so it's like analogous to grayscale. It's like a heat map, basically. The activation maps are like a heat map of where was this filter matched. But then we have multiple different features which we're looking for, multiple different weights being applied, and as you can imagine, on different kind of heat maps, you could have different heat for different things, which is like the different layers, the different output activation maps for these convolution operations with many different filters. Cool. So, and then is pooling also applied by convolving with average argmax type kernel? Yeah. So it's sort of doing this the convolution in the sense that it is the same operation applied to every different location in the image, but it's not the element-wise multiplication or anything. No, it's a different operation. So we'll just pool in this layer. And depending on what type of pooling we're doing, if that's max, it's going to produce a 1 for the whole of this region. If it's average, it's going to produce a half. There are also different types of pooling, but we won't get into them. Cool, great questions, guys. Thank you. So where are we at now? We did pooling and sweet. Yeah. So. What else does that mean? Well, because pooling summarizes values in local regions, it can help models be more robust under translation of the input, making them more translation invariant. So this means that, if I have some feature in a particular location of the image and I train with pooling, well then, regardless of whether that feature is 2 pixels to the left or 2 pixels to the right, the pooling is going to produce the same output from both those two images, right? So it means that then it'll be able to basically generalize between similarly spatially translated inputs, and that's what translation invariance means. Cool. So pooling layers also slide kernels over their input and reduce the values within that grid to a single value, perform different operations. So I talk about max pooling, average pooling, and then see the docs for more pooling layers. So the output of conv layers or conv neural networks. So unless we keep applying convolutional layers to our data until it's reduced to a height and width of 1, the output's still going to have some spatial dimensions, right? So like in this example, if we applied another 3x3 convolution, we'd produce a 1x1 feature map for each different filter. But maybe we've got a much bigger image, in which case it might be like, maybe it may be doing like 3x3 kernels. It would take us like 100 layers to do that, to get to a 1x1. But we don't want our model to be that deep. We probably can't train it to be that deep. So maybe we'll just do like 3 convolutions. At that point, if our image is much larger than this, the output won't be 1x1, which means it won't be a vector, right? So each activation map won't be 1x1, and the stack of those will not be a 1x1 by n, right? It will be a higher number by a higher number by n. It will not be a vector. And we basically, we are going to do classification here. So what we want to produce is a vector of 10 numbers, which are the confidences of the input belonging to each of these different 10 classes, which are the possible integer digits, which are the classes of mness. That's what we're going to do. So we need to produce a vector somehow. But we have a tensor. We have, say, like a 3x3 by 64 output. So what we can do, the common thing to do is to hope that by performing these successive convolutions, we've summarized the information enough such that the values in that, say, 3x3 by 64 output represent very high level features. They represent like, how confident am I there's a person in this image and that kind of stuff. And so by that point, we've abstracted away most of the spatial information in the image, and we've replaced it with these high-level features which are more analogous to the example which I discussed in the beginning, such as a vector of like hair length or height or age. So we've combined all of the spatial information into summary statistics, and now that we've done that, we can basically flatten out the output of our ConvNet like we did on our input for our neural networks, like this. So we'll just take this, assuming that we've already processed it several times, with multiple convolutions to abstract away that spatial information. Then we'll flatten it, and then we will actually apply a linear layer to it. So that's basically how we get a final output from the ConvNet. So let's implement it. We've already done this, so basically this is just boilerplate we can run through, but yeah, we're just getting the training data set from Torch datasets, get the test data set, printing an example, splitting into training, test, and validation, and then making the data loaders. So I'll run that. It's not authorized by Google, don't care. Sweet. Alright, so this printed us an example. So just as a reminder, this is what an example of the MNIST dataset looks like. It's a grayscale 28 by 28 image. And by grayscale, I mean it has one channel. So it's not RGB, there's only one channel, which means that the filters which we're going to convolve over this will only have a depth of 1 to start with in the first layer. So now I want you guys to take let's say let's say 10 minutes and try and figure out all of this stuff. So it's quite a lot, but we've basically done most of it already, right? So you know what torch.nn.sequential does. This is basically going to take in a list of different torch modules and apply them to whatever is passed into this thing, which is callable. And so what I'm looking for here is I want a convolutional layer, and I want an activation function, and then a convolutional layer, and then an activation function. You guys should know what activation functions we're gonna use. In fact, I'm gonna put a few questions in the chat which I want you guys to answer. Sorry, this is just description as well. You don't have to fill that in. This is an old notebook, so it doesn't go with our convention of having a double hashtag where you need to fill in, but you need to fill in these 9 lines. Cool. All right. So so go ahead and do that, and think about how are we gonna the things you need to think about is like, what's the size of the convolutional layer, and this describes the arguments in order. So what's the parameters for that? You can find them out by looking at the torch docs. So you should just go to just go here and then just go torch.nn. This is what we want. And you should have an idea that you should search convolution or something. Let's have a look at conv2d. This is the function which I want you guys to use to produce the convolution layers. God, no. Okay, yeah, cool. So go ahead and find conv2d. And then use it as is. All the parameters I've discussed are down here. Even gives you the mathematical equation for how that's produced. Yeah, conv layer activation, fully connected layer, and then we're going to have a softmax on the end of all of that to produce a probability distribution over the 10 different categories which we have. So cool. We'll just do 10 minutes on that. I'm going to do, say, 8 minutes from now. I'll come back at 35 past. Sweet. Alright guys, back. And so I'm really hoping that somebody can tell me, this is the easy question, we're going to get to hard questions very soon, but what are the dimensions of images again? I'm hoping you have done this, as I said, and then tell me. So please let me know. And then we'll move on. Cool. So I want someone to tell me as well, what did they put for the first conv layer? Like, what's the function we need to call? And extra points, what arguments did you give it? So if somebody can please, one person tell me the dimension of the MNIST images, another person tell me the function, and maybe with the arguments they gave it, and if not, someone else can give me the arguments, and then also someone can give me the activation function. And then we'll fill this in. Cool. So what are the dimensions of the images? All we got to do is print x.shape. We defined x in the first cell, so just make a new cell and then do print x.shape and tell me what it gives you. And then, also tell me what arguments we're going to give our first function and what that function is going to be. I'll be disappointed. Yeah, that's exactly right. 1 by 28 by 28, that's the size of the image. So that's the depth of the image, which is only one channel, and then the number of pixels, the width by height, just 28 by 28. Great work. Cool. So we're not that great. Come on, that was like a really easy question. So now what's the function we're gonna call to make our convolutional layer, and then on what arguments are we gonna give that? I've already shown you the docs, so I hope that you have got that answer. Also, there's an answers notebook in the same repo if you haven't figured that out. But yeah, I hope one of you can tell me what is the function that I'm gonna put on this line. It's actually not a function, it's in a class instantiation. It's torch.nn.something. So I'm hoping someone can tell me that. And then these are the different arguments which we need to pass it. So in this order, that's actually the function. This is the first argument, number of channels, which in the input, and the second is the number of channels in the output. So how many channels are in the input? Yep, cool, great. So torch.nn.conv2d, that's the name of the function. And you say you don't know the arguments. Well, the arguments are these things. So you can give me the in channels, right? This is the number of channels of the input. What's our input? Well, this is our input. How many channels does this have? How many channels does that input have? So yeah, you're right. 12.nn.conv conv2d, like that. As we saw in the docs, actually, that's capital C, and that's because this is not a function. As I said, it's a class. So we're going to instantiate this this class. So that's just a convention in PyTorch, obviously. Classes start with capital. And the first argument is number of channels in, right? So how many channels does our input have? How many channels does the input have? How many channels are in the input? Come on. This is like a dumb easy question. Such an easy question. Number of channels in our input. One channel, correct. So first argument is 1. And the next argument is number of channels out. Okay, right, so how many features am I going to look for in this image? Or maybe a better question, does it matter? does it matter how many filters I use in the first layer? Does it matter? Does it matter how many filters I use? Do I know how many distinct different patterns I'm going to look for in my image? Is that something I, as a human, have a good idea about? What do you think about how I'm expressing that question? Does it matter? We're going to run out of time if someone doesn't answer this obvious question. Does it matter how many filters I use? It's a binary question. Even a guess, you will be 50% chance. Yeah, probably not enough to stop the model from working. I mean, I don't quite know what you mean, but the answer is no. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many channels I use, right? It's like number of channels is number of different filters that we want to use. That's the number of different patterns I'm going to look for in this image. And it's just like, no, it doesn't matter. So I'm just going to say 32. Nice power of 12. And the third argument is the kernel size. So I'm just going to say, again, it doesn't matter. I'm going to say 7. Let's say a 7 by 7 kernel. If I just give it a single number, it will assume a square kernel. Otherwise, I could give it a tuple of arguments, and then it would say that that's a 7 by 5 kernel. But I'm just going to say, yeah, it doesn't matter. And then stride by default, I'm going to leave it as 1. So that's fine. That's my first layer. And then I'm going to do activation function. I'm going to do, so I've got torchstone.functional as f. This just contains all like functional versions of things rather than classes for the things which are non-parameterized. I'm going to say relu. And second conv layer, torch.nn.conv2d, not conv3d, although that is a thing. I'm sure you can imagine for what. And okay, well, what's the number of channels in here? Someone tell me this. Like, what's the number of channels into my second layer? Any idea? Given that I have 32 filters being applied in the first layer, what is the number of channels in the input to my second layer? That is the question. 32 filters in my first layer, and that produced some output. Exactly, 32, the same with the output as the first. We can see that as in this diagram here. So it's like here I had 4 filters. I produced an output activation map with 4 channels. And this is going to be convolved with filters which go all the way through those channels, right? And so they are going to have the same depth as the output, which is 4. So this this third argument, sorry, the second argument, sorry, the first argument in channels, no, sorry, the second argument out channels is, yes, it is the number of channels in the output activation map stack, but it's also the number of filters which we want to use, right? So if I take in, you know, like in this layer, in the first layer, I'm taking one layer, this thing has 1 layer, and I'm going to apply 32 different filters to it. Each of them is going to produce an activation map, and hence this is the number of output channels. So yeah, the same number go into this next layer as came out the first. And again, second layer doesn't matter, so I'm going to say 16, just keep it small. And then I'm going to say, cool, we're also going to use a 7 by 7 kernel in this layer. And then I'll also say f.relu in my as my activation function. So what's going to happen with this stuff? Well, torchstone.sequential, it knows that each of its arguments should be callable and that they will be called sequentially by taking in whatever this is called with and passing it through this layer. So if I do self.convLayer of x down here, what that's going to do is it's firstly going to call this with x, then it's going to call this with that output of that layer, and then so on. And then the fully convolutional layers, we're going to do a so yeah, we'll do torch.nn.linear as we did previously, and I would like someone to tell me. Okay, so the first argument, what goes into this, we'll leave it as a question for now. But the output, what's the output size of this linear layer? Think about the problem that we're trying to solve, right? It's classifying these different digits. So how many numbers should be in the output vector? So what's the dimension of the fully connected layer output? 10, exactly, because there's 10 different classes. Exactly 10 classes. Cool. So yeah, we're going to put a 10 here. And all right, so let's just think about like, what is this number? What is this linear number? So like I said, we're going to get an output stack of activation maps. And what we're going to do is we're going to flatten this. And then that's going to become a vector. And so the question is, what's the dimension of this vector? We could use this equation, which I've given here, to calculate it, right? So we could say, okay, well, the input is 28, and the kernel size is 7, and then the stride is 1, and then calculate that. And then we could do that for the next layer as well, you know, but it's a bit long. It just gets a bit long. So what I'm just going to put is I'm just going to put 1, and it's going to break. It's not going to work, but then it's going to tell me what it should be later, okay, and then we'll figure it out. So we'll pass it through the conv layers first. So obviously this is a class, we'd find conv layers, so we'll do self.convolutional layers of our input x, and then we'll do flatten it, so then we'll do x equals x.view, and we're going to view it as something, right? So I'm going to say, well, we're going to pass in multiple examples at once, right? And then the first dimension of this batch of examples is the batch dimension. So let's say I have a batch size of 4, right? But then my data set might not be an integer multiple of 4. So I might get to the end and there'll only be 3 left. In which case, it's not going to give me the right shape I want. So what I'm going to say actually is like, well, I don't care what the batch dimension is. There can be as many items in the batch as there need to be, but the length of all of the output feature maps flattened into a vector, that should be something, you know, that should be something. So I'm just going to put a random number there for now. It's going to break and it's going to tell me what that should be in a bit. And then we're going to pass through a fully connected layer. So self.fc layers of x, and then we'll do the softmax as well. So we'll do f.softmax of x. And then we'll define this. Cool. So invalid syntax, yeah, because these are different arguments. Sweet. All right, that's defined. Nice. Now, cool. So basically, I'm going to check my GPUs available. I'm going to say I'm going to set the. I'm basically going to make the torch device. So basically I'm going to say this is my GPU, set the learning rate, and then I'm going to set a number of epochs. Then I'm going to instantiate my convolutional net, put it on my GPU, and then I'm going to create my cross entropy loss criterion. So we discussed that in previous lecture. This is basically a classification loss. So it computes how bad the model is, given that this produces a callable object, which takes in the prediction and the label and produces a classification loss. The optimizer, we're going to use Adam as our optimizer, which is going to optimize the parameters returned by our CNN's parameters function. And we're going to start off with the learning rate we defined. We're also going to set up a TensorBoard and do some visualization, which we're going to use a SumArray writer for. So we'll do that in a sec. So we're going to run this first. Okay, right, so it actually doesn't like this. It doesn't like that torch.nn.functional.relu is not a module subclass. What does that mean? Well, it means that this thing should not be there. It should actually be torch.nn.relu. So things like that. And this is a module subclass. That done. Nice. All right, cool. So we made our convnet, and yeah, these do subclass the torch.nn, which is what it wants. Now we're just going to create our training loop. So what are we doing here? Well, we're going to train some particular model for a certain number of epochs, and so for epoch, in those epochs, I'm going to get the index of the batch. I'm going to get the tuple of the inputs and the labels from our train loader. And then I'm going to unpack those inputs and those labels and put them on my GPU. And here I'm going to pass my input through my model to get a prediction. So the way I would do that, someone please tell me what goes on this line. So this is number 1. So please tell me what the answer to number 1 is. What do I put there? Oh, actually no. Sorry, that's the next line. Yeah, okay. I don't know why that's there. This is the line anyway. So prediction. I'm going to use the model to make a prediction, and then I'm going to calculate a loss. And if I'm in verbose mode, I'm going to print the stuff. I'm going to set all of the parameters .grad attributes to 0 using this 0 grad function of my optimizer. Then I'll do loss.backwards. To fill those .grad attributes. So each of these each of the parameters of the model is a tensor which has a .grad attribute. Initially that's empty. When we do .backward, it gets filled with the value, which is the rate of change of the loss with respect to that tensor. And then we do optimizer.step, which looks in all of the parameters which the optimizer is optimizing, takes that .grad attribute and moves the actual value of the tensor according to the optimization scheme, in this case Adam. So yeah, we'll define that training function, and it's going to throw an error, right? It's going to say 3 is the invalid shape for this input size. So this is the wrong shape, right? I have passed it through my Conv Layers and it's been tried to be viewed as this shape, but that doesn't fit. So, and this is what I said earlier, this is a problem which we're going to experience. So we need, this number is wrong, right? Well, what number should be? Well, probably should be this, right? Yeah, 1, 3 is well, actually, so it's not going to be this. It's going to be this divided by the number of items in the batch, right? Because if I've got this big tensor and I try and squash it into this shape, well then it's not going to happen. Actually, let's just try something. Is it going to work if I say did 2? Because that is actually a multiple of this. Cool, right? So here it's got past that layer because it could actually make it into this shape, right? And this is because it could say, if there was, say, 50,000 rows or something like that, and I tried to say, yeah, each of them has to have 3 columns, well then 3 is not an integer multiple. 3 is not a factor of that, so it wouldn't be able to happen, but 2 is, so it could do. Now it's gone through here, and it's gone to the FC layers, and it's, where are we? Are we in the, no, oh, that's a cool feature though. So now we're in the, we've gone past this point, right? So now we're in the fully connected layers, but this is wrong. So what do I actually want this to be? I need to flatten my output for fully connected layer. I mean, firstly, let's just print x.shape. Okay. Cool, so this was the shape, right? So I had 128 by 16 by 16 by 16. Okay, so well, what's that 128 firstly? this is our batch size. So batch size was 128 by 28. So okay, well then what are these numbers? 16 by 16 by 16. Well, what if we change this number? Okay, then what do we see? We see this. So we know the first number is the batch dimension. This is how many items there are. This is how many batches. This is how many items are in the batch. This is the depth of the activation maps, and this is the height and width of those activation maps. So what the shape of this x.view should be is the product of these three numbers, right? Because for each of these different items, 128, I still want 128 different vectors, and each of them is going to have a size 64 by 16 by 16, because it's going to be this thing squashed, right? So what number I'm going to put here to make it programmatic, because I'm going to do I have numpy? Yeah, cool, I do. I'm going to do np.prod, so I'm going to take a product of all of them, x.shape, from the first one onwards, okay? Now we should get through there, and then we can print x.shape, and then we should see that the first dimension is 128, okay? Try that. There you go, cool. So I've got 128 vectors of this shape. I'm gonna reduce the size so it trains faster and see if it actually works. Cool, so there we go. We've got past here now, and now we've got this problem. And this says that basically 1 is not the same size as 4096. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to change this from 1 to 4096. And then we'll delete this. And then we're going to go. Here we go. Training, 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 loss decreasing. Right, yeah, I can't. It's the first time I've used Colab actually, so I can't do TensorBoard here, can I? Anyway, we can see the losses going down, so that's great. Can I also use a GPU here? Something. Runtime. Yeah. Change runtime type, hardware accelerator, TPU. Yes, please. Okay, then I'm actually going to stop this and I'm going to try and run it on TPU. So that will probably be faster. Ah, okay, I've got to run all this again. But it's going to be worth it. Example. Okay, that should be going faster. Okay, it's going to take a while. Yeah, it's going down gradually. And yeah, and then basically this last function is simple, so I'm sure you guys can figure out what this means, but it basically is just calculating the accuracy, so you print each line to figure out how it's doing that, and make sure you can figure that out. Yeah, that's basically it. That's the whole CNN lecture, and what we've seen is that we can use convolutional neural networks to preserve the spatial structure in our inputs, which means that we'll probably be able to use smaller and faster models to perform the kind of tasks, the representation from input to output that we want to figure out. And we've seen what convolution is and how we can learn that using backpropagation, the different parameters of convolutional operations, the analogies to vanilla neural networks, pooling, we've seen that, and then we've implemented that here. So here's the code for doing convolutional neural network, and please make sure you understand that. I will be around throughout the week, and you can contact me on Slack and everywhere else. And you should also know that we really want to help you guys get hired, especially at this time. So if you guys are looking for a job, then we can help. So please just click the bar, which should be at the bottom of your page. Should say get hired. Please click that and let us know, and we will reach out to help. And we're here whenever you have questions about AI or just hacking in general, product startups. Please just let us know. Yeah, let me know any questions we got as well. How does torch.nn.sequential work? It takes in a sequence of arguments which need to inherit from torch.nn.module. So these different things, it takes in these things, and each of them needs to be callable. So here's a class which I've instantiated, which basically sets up a convolutional layer, defines its parameters and everything. And this is callable, which means that I could put brackets on the end of this and pass something into it, and it would produce me something. And it basically calls each of these layers in turn. No problem. Yeah, be here next week. Catch us on Open Hacking. More features to come. I'm going to send you a form, because that's a new feature as well. But there's a few more stuff that needs to be worked out before I can send that. View the responses, but there you go. Was it epic? Let me know. Cool. Yeah, thanks for coming, guys. And yeah, let us know any questions you have here. Let us know if you have any difficulties running that. Catch us at Open Hacking. Otherwise, AI Core out.